Hi guys, we're on to chapter 20. The story gets even twistier. At first, there's something looked like a little slick of black oil leaking out of the stone, like the yolk leaking out of a broken shell. It couldn't be the king witch, could it? For how could that thing they had seen inside there creep out of the split only an inch wide? Surely the witch must be dead when a great big witch-killing sword had been driven right into the stone enclosing it. That must be the dead witch's blood leaking out of the broken stone. But in front of their eyes, the pool of liquid grew larger and larger. And then the black water solidified, turned in front of their eyes into something flesh and blood that moved, a real and living body. A feathery, soggy scarecrow of a something, feathers soaking wet. Sometimes people like to reassure themselves that witches can't possibly ever have been as bad as the fairy stories said they were. One look at the king witch told you that they were every bit as bad, and maybe even somewhat worse. Just looking at a witch has been known to scare a person to death. They can, of course, assume many forms, some of them quite pleasant, but mostly they find it helpful to look as scary as possible. The thing had a nose like a knife, so razor sharp and pointy at the end that it looked like you could cut onions with it. There were just 2 black holes instead of eyes either side, like deep wells with something flinty and slimy as mercury glinting queasily at the bottom of them. The mouth, dripping that revolting black saliva from the fangs. The jaws could unhinge to swallow a deer in one gulp. A body like a human mixed with a panther and those black feathery wings. All in all, the king witch was not a pretty sight. Power reeked from that slithering thing as slowly he unfurled its wet, black wings to their full extent, and they dripped on the dungeon floor, black, smoking drips, as he lifted his beak and looked straight at Tsar and Bodkin. And then he vanished. Where is it? Where is it? Said Tsar, whirling around. The animals howled in horror. The sprites opened up their fang-filled mouths and shrieked in fear, for there are few things more scary than an enemy you cannot see. Excuse me a minute. Wish, over on the other side of the room, picked herself up shaking. Nobody panic, said Caliburn, panicking like crazy. Where is it? Can anyone see it? The 3 of them whirled around and around trying to see the invisible witch, but there was nothing there. It's going to attack Wish, said Tsar. He knew this, but he wasn't sure why. Sure enough, the air above Wish seemed to thicken and darken. Bravely, the enchanted spoon standing on Wish's head turned to face that darkness. But an enchanted spoon is the sort of thing you might want on your side if you were making dessert, not if you are facing one of the most terrifying life forms that has ever walked this planet. Tsar tried to drag the sword out of the stone, but it was stuck fast, as if it had been rooted there all along. However hard he pulled, it would not budge. So, with another blood-curdling yell, completely unarmed, Tsar, the boy who cared for nobody but himself, launched himself at the diving witch. As the witch screeched downward, diving at Wish, he was turning himself visible as he plunged, and turning yourself visible is not as easy or painless as lighting a candle. It looked indeed as if the atmosphere itself were being ripped apart like a curtain. At first, the head appeared, half melting at the edges with black sparks and smoke. And then, with a terrible smell of burning feathers, the witch himself screaming like a falcon. Wish ducked automatically. The witch had been aiming straight for her head, intending to tear it off. Dear little creatures, these witches, aren't they? Nasty. But Tsar and the snowcats leapt the mightiest leaps they had ever leapt, and they caught the diving witch by his tail. So instead, the witch's talons scraped across Wish's face, ripping off her eye patch, as the witch soared up into the air, and Wish yelled and put her hands over her head as she fell to the floor. With a furious scream, the witch shook off Tsar and the snowcats, swirling round viciously, and turned to attack the insignificant and irritating human boy who had shoved the sword in the stone and frustrated its pursuit of Wish. The witch smiled, and oh, by mistletoe and all things sweet and juicy and poisonous, a witch's grin is a terrible thing. He unhinged his jaw so that he could swallow Tsar in one gulp. Nasty. The hot witch's breath reeked so revoltingly of rotten eggs and death that Tsar nearly passed out from the stink of it. At least I'm going to die a glorious death, thought Tsar through his terror, not some kind of non-entity. I'll be the first person to be killed by a witch in hundreds and hundreds of years. How like Tsar to be thinking of fame and glory even at the point of death. The witch swooped. This time he would not miss. Chapter 21, Wishing. Bodkin shouted, "No!" Over in the other corner of the room, Bodkin saw Wish uncurl her hands from over her face. She lifted her head and she too shouted, "No!" The witch had torn off her eye patch and it had fallen to the floor. Wish's eye that was normally hidden underneath the eye patch was closed, but there was a deep scratch over it. It was ever so slightly larger than the other eye, and all around the edge was a deep purple bruise, as if the poor human skin found the burning force of it difficult to bear. As Wish shouted, she opened her eyelid just a tiny, tiny crack, and the colour of the eye underneath was a very odd colour indeed. It was a colour that no one had ever seen before, a hitherto unimagined colour. I can't describe it, apart from comparing it to other things. It was a colour that managed to be both warm and cold at the same time, a colour that reminded you of volcanoes, of thunderstorms, of electricity, of power. Wish could feel the power within her, and it was truly terrifying. A rage, a riot, a thunderstorm in her head, so violent it made her head ache, as if goblins were hammering it from the inside. The individual hairs on her head twitched upward vertically in the air. A confused, sickening wind ricocheted round the room, sending the sprites and the feathers and the dust bowling through the air, and the floor bent and shivered like it was a nauseous sea. In the depths of that extraordinary eye, strange clouds formed, like the beginning and the churning and the building of ideas, and there was a tiny snapping noise, and the magic screamed out of Wish's eyes so forcefully you could see the impossible colour of it, in the shape of a bent and twisted star, hitting the witch at exactly the same point that the witch pointed his taloned finger to shoot one piercing blast of white-hot magic back at Wish. And then, bang! The witch exploded into a mass of charcoal and black feathers. Bodkin and Tsar and the snowcats were blown off their feet. The dust and feathers of the witch fell through the air like dark rain. You see? Explosion. It's gone. Truly. And that is the end. The end of that chapter. Well, that was quick. Let me just have a look a minute. Chapter 22. I'll quickly do it. Making amends and paying the price. The walls and the floor ceased their wild shaking and came to a shuddering halt, with such violent abruptness that a few large stones fell out of the doorway. "Oh my goodness, I don't believe it, I did it!" gasped Tsar in astonishment, raising himself onto one elbow, coughing and spluttering, and staggering to his feet in the dust clouds, trying to catch the dropping feathers in his joy. "I killed the witch!" "Wake up, assistant bodyguard, wake up!" Tsar gently prodded the prone body of Bodkin with his foot, for Bodkin had fainted once again with the shock of it. "I've killed the witch! I did it!" "The witch is dead, the witch is dead!" sang the sprites, joyfully turning somersaults in the air. Groggily, Bodkin came to, rubbing his head. "What happened? What happened?" "It exploded!" marvelled Tsar excitedly. For Tsar was a boy who loved an explosion. Don't we all? "It actually exploded! It was magnificent! The loudest explosion I have ever heard. I can't believe you missed it." Tsar whooped joyfully as he held out his hand to help Bodkin to his feet. "It exploded!" Bodkin, in a dazed manner, reached out his hand to catch one of the feathers still dropping through the wreck of the room. "Look," said Tsar, pointing at the feathers lying all around them. "That's all that's left of the witch. Wish's magic exploded it, but it was my brilliant sword thrust that will have made it weak enough for the explosion to work." He raised his fist in the air. "I am the boy of destiny. Feel my power!" "Oh my goodness me, we did it!" shouted Bodkin as he realised the enormity of what they had achieved. "We've killed the king witch! Wizards and warriors working together!" Tsar and Bodkin hugged each other as the snowcats capered joyfully around them on the churned up floor, howling with happiness. Yes, I have to admit, Wish, you were a bit of a help with that weird thing you did with your eye. What was that? Tsar turned to congratulate Wish, but Wish was not there. It was only then that they realised how silent it was. The walls were not shaking. The churned-up floor was perfectly still beneath their feet, and it wasn't only feathers that were falling quietly through the chamber and landing on the floor beneath them. There were also flakes like snowflakes, and each individual flake, was a very unusual colour. Silence, apart from the gentle falling of black feathers, snow an unusual colour, and dust. But where is Wash? Said Bodkin in a bewildered way, looking around the room at the open doorway where the door blasted out of it. Did you see where she went? Look, the door's come off its hinges. Maybe she ran out to fetch help or something. And then he noticed the spoon lying motionless in the centre of the floor. Tsar knelt and picked up the spoon. It was hard and cold, now that all enchantment had gone from it. A perfectly ordinary iron dinner spoon. Carefully, Tsar laid it back down on the floor again. Silence in the chamber of magic removal. Caliburn flew to Tsar's shoulder with long, slow, reluctant wing beats and perched there in misery. I'm so sorry, Tsar, said Caliburn. But in the confusion, I think you didn't notice a second explosion nearly at the same time as the first. Wish was taken by surprise. She was shocked into letting down her guard. The King Witch let off a final burst of magic, and it hit her directly. She exploded as well as the King Witch, said Tsar. Unbelievable as it was, Tsar unable to believe it because he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Impossible. Inconceivable. Come back, Wish, thought Tsar fiercely. Come back. I wish you would come back. But he couldn't breathe life back into those fragments, however much he longed to. Breathe. Be alive again. Move of your own accord. But the strange coloured dust that was once Wish lay cold and still, and not any of Tsar's wishing could make it move again. Even the greatest conjurer in the world could not do that. Actions have consequences. You must pay the price of making amends, and some things happen that cannot unhappen. Tsar cried. He and Bodkin knelt together in the room, and they cried. Their heads bowed, while the black feathers and the weird-coloured dust lay quiet and unmoving in a circle all around them. Even the sprites wept, and fairies do not cry. It is one of the things about them. They never, ever cry. But their tears drop down onto the feathers and the snow. And then, through streaming eyes, Tsar thought he saw the edge of the spoon twitch. He blinked. Maybe it was an illusion. But no, there it was again, a definite wriggle of the outline of the spoon. What's happening? Whispered Bodkin with round, wondering eyes. What's going on? Whispered the sprites, gripping tight to their pin-sharp needles of wands. Their hair shot out electrically, sharp. The room bristled once again with magic. The strangely coloured little flakes of Wish lifted themselves up from the floor. A great cloud of little fragments that sang like birdsong as they flurried around in the air, shuffling and rearranging themselves as if they had some internal memory of exactly where in their infinitely complicated jigsaw puzzle that makes up a human being their tiny individual piece was supposed to be. They never bumped into each other, those millions and millions of tiny dusty ashy pieces, flying around in a whirling flurry of animation, until they settled gradually onto the floor, forming the nose, eyes, ears, mouth, legs of Wish. Like they were creating a sculpture out of thin air, building life itself in front of Tsar and Bodkin's very eyes. For a second, the perfect sculpture was still, dead, perfect but inert, the robotic outline of what once had been Wish. But above Tsar and Bodkin's head, the last fragments of Wish were forming themselves into the shape of a human heart, suspended in the air. Look, breathed Tithin Storm above them, and Tsar caught his breath. That's impossible, thought Tsar. I can't be seeing that. A flying heart? The small brown heart descended from above, rather fast, in a hurry, and plunged softly through the chest of Wish lying on the floor. And Wish sat straight up like a wooden automaton, and took a huge gulp of air, gasped it like she was drinking in life itself, and went from death to life in a shaking, spluttering, ugly with spittle and phlegm moment. Wish sat upright, gasping for air. What? What happened? She's alive! And I'm definitely leaving it there. I will see you tomorrow. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.